Good afternoon and welcome. I am Marty Hoofer, Digital Content Manager for Keep Indiana Learning, and we are so excited to have you here today as part of our Strengthening Support for Multilingual Learners series. As you know, Tanika Kennardle has been the host for all the other sessions, but she is not feeling well today, so I am here to be your host and your producer tech person behind the scenes. So I'll try to keep all the roles straight. Just a couple of housekeeping things. We will use the chat. So feel free to put any questions you have there. You can either send them to the whole group or you can send them to me individually. And I will ask Laura those questions at the end with whatever time we have left through a moderated Q&A. Also, there will be a link at the end of the session for you to get your professional growth points. If you need those for license renewal, I will put that link in there as well. And for those of you maybe watching the recording later, I will also put the link to that survey in the show notes, so you will have it as well. So I am not going to keep us any longer. We are very excited to have Laura Price with us today. Our title of our session is Translanguaging, Utilizing Home Languages in Classroom Instruction. And Laura is an experienced educator, interpreter, and translator who combines her skills to advocate for language access for families and the development of interpreters for school settings. She's originally from Uruguay, and she holds a master's degree in education from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and a master's in Spanish and Translanguaging and Translation Studies from UNC at Charlotte. And I also discovered she's currently pursuing her PhD. So a true lifelong learner you are, Laura.
Thank you so much. And hello to everybody. And I see people are still connecting, and I'm not going to entertain you any longer, but let me share the screen with all of you. A pleasure to be with you. Let me see if we can see my screen. I hope we do.
Here we go. It looks great.
Okay,
thank you.
Perfect. Okay, hello everybody. And the topic, as we said, we are going to be discussing a little bit of translanguaging, something I do use on a daily basis, both in the courses I teach and I believe in my life. The picture that I put here is the sea, because what I always think about is that my mind is always doing the same movement of the water. Underneath, Spanish is going, and on the top, English is coming. And I'm always regurgitating this movement every day of my life, which is a little bit of what translanguaging is about. So what are the outcomes of this seminar? If you look at it, I chose to put this actual picture that is an immersion of everything that being bilingual implies, but also the translanguaging aspect on it that makes all this happen for our students and for ourselves in the classroom. So our outcomes today will be that we learn a little bit about what translanguaging involves and why it is important and how to do it. A lot of the things that we are trying in these encounters that we are having online together is getting a little learning on how to put things in practice in our classrooms. So the concept of translanguaging, the goal in mind is using all the linguistic competence. And what does it involve? It involves the use of several languages. It means being flexible in how we communicate. It implies using experiential knowledge. It's hands-on learning. That's what we are looking for. We are not static. We are not receivers only of knowledge. We are putting into practice what we learn. And also integrating what we have in the background. So the students bring a lot of treasures to our classroom, and it is our role as an educator to pull that knowledge out and actually connect it with the present knowledge that they're trying to acquire. So when we come to the classroom, we see two sides of the translanguaging. In the first one, we think about the student, and what the student brings to the table is the interest for learning and that motivation to acquire knowledge. In this case, acquiring a second language for them. The thing is, when we look at translanguaging, we are thinking about what is natural about language acquisition, and how we do it implies that it will take some time of immersion, little by little, and a constant exposure of the language. From the teacher perspective, on the other side, is continually looking how to bridge that gap in terms of the language acquisition and how to make it relatable and also give motivation to those students. But when we think about translanguaging, we are looking at different things. We're also thinking about culture. No? So we are not only thinking about how the languages encounter and how one language borrows from the other to make this thing work. We're also thinking about how students process that language and how those concepts come to be. You know, in some of them, they may have grown learning both languages. So they may have both languages and they may pull from both. In others, they may have come to this country and now they are acquiring the language later on. So you are going to see different ways of evolving, and each student that you may have is different. Something that you may see, you know, and probably you have been exposed to these scans and many stages of your education, that the brains look a little different in terms of bilingualism and how we process. It's well known about the multitasking. I do it all the time. My brain is split in two all the time. And as such, I have vocabulary that sometimes comes in one language and sometimes comes in another. And I'm always refraining to keep the languages in line. But the main thing here, obtaining equity requires having both languages in place and letting the student use everything they bring to the table. So several things to think about. What is translanguaging? What are the ways to define this? Well, on one hand, is thinking about the flexibility of the bilingual learners and the adaptability that they have in terms of acquiring the second language, but also thinking about the effort that they are making to take control of their own learning and how to guide them better for them to acquire that language, you know, with success and with excitement. And also, the language comes out in different order depending on what they're exposed to, you know, what kind of language we are giving to them in the classroom, what kind of subject are they studying, no? Everyday language normally comes easier, and those that are academics are more challenging. But the other thing to think about is that in order to get the understanding and also to promote involvement of those students, they need to use both languages. In the beginning, it's easier to actually let that second language come up for the students to complete the whole idea. They may not have the whole vocabulary. They may be able to read, but they may not be able to do biology or math or history. So bilinguals move through life using their languages to make sense of the world. There are things that come from a culture, different cultures, the way we see the world, the way we expect things to happen, even the way we study, the way we expect a classroom to take place is going to be guided by culture. And even those things come in place when you're coming to a classroom. So transitions are important and they need to be as seamless as possible. Something important about translanguaging is what it does for the students. It supports those bilingual learners and also brings along the household to the classroom. When we are accepting a second language, we are also giving relevance to those families that speak that language at home. And we are also reaching out to those families to integrate their knowledge in our classroom. And it also leverages the learning at home. We include the parent, and we also accept that the student has something that can be shared with the class. Everybody likes to be praised for knowledge. So a second language is extra knowledge that needs to be welcome. And another thing is that translanguaging is easy to implement. Doesn't mean that you need to have a second language, but there are little things that you can do that will bridge that gap and will actually help those students in the classroom. These are some facts about translanguaging. So when we use those languages, we enhance understanding. We support the development in both English and the home language. Something that in the past got confused really easily was that we needed to focus on English only versus thinking about the other language that was spoken in the home. And the thing is that there are many words that will be similar at times, and those cognates can help actually English work better. There are many words that I know from my own language that may be at a higher level or higher rank than words in the order that would come along naturally in English. And those reinforce my language. The same happens for the students, but also is the inclusion and the cultural validation that they are coming to a class that shows acceptance and excitement for a second language or multiple languages. In all actuality, if you think about many of the families that may be from Mexico or Guatemala, they may not only speak Spanish, they may have another dialect, such as Otomi, such as Chatino or Mam. They don't sound anything like Spanish. I tell you that. Many of them don't even have verbs. Some of them don't even have a written form. However, they are part of their richness of vocabulary that they express in the household. So many of the things that are said, many of the things that people think have all that richness, not only of vocabulary, but also culture. If you are thinking about why I have this picture here, goes related to a famous researcher who is Canadian, Cummings, who actually talks quite a bit about how the languages evolve. And the things that sometimes we see in the classroom is quite a bit of BICS, or basic interpersonal communication skills. So people know how to communicate with each other. They may be able to greet each other. They may be able to play and have the vocabulary to play. But then all of a sudden, when the vocabulary gets challenging, because it's related to biology, it is related to history, and all of a sudden, now there are lack of words to express those ideas. Many times when I was acting as an interpreter, and I will say is a beauty that I have an opportunity to see both worlds, be a teacher on one hand and also be an interpreter. It was easy to see sometimes the teachers say, we do not need an interpreter. We are able to bridge these two languages. The dad can speak English, yes, and probably he did. But in many cases, they were functioning at the BICS level. And we were working all this nice vocabulary typical of education that was related to ESL, related to an IEP, and we had all these words in and all these explanations about test that had a lot of vocabulary that the parents were not familiar because they were not they didn't have the academics. So that happens also to the students. So the students may be functioning well, but now you give them instructions for a problem that they need to solve. And they were able to do math until they had to understand all the words in written, and now they're struggling. So how does it look like? And this is what I think is the fun part. What do we need to think about when we are doing it in practice? So this is an example, no? And I will really read it from there. So during an outdoor ESL lesson, the teacher explains that one tree is bigger and the other one is smaller, no? And this young child says, the tree is grander. So yes, they are noticing that comparatives add ER, so they got the rules in English, but however, they combine the Spanish and they express the idea, no? And then that's an example of the features of Spanish Grande and the comparative, ER. No? And if you want to read a lot more, you can read from Garcia. She is very rich in everything that's written about translanguaging and more. Sorry. Another way of looking at it, and this was kind of basic, it may be going further. No, so let's think about a middle school social study class. No, so these two kids are talking to each other, and they were trying to translate everything said in class. You know, the kids are very resourceful, especially now that they have technology. They may have the phones, they may have a tablet, they may have the computer, or the three of them. So they put this together and they formulate a response. They were talking among themselves, no? And the teacher got frustrated. So he's asking that they are not supposed to be talking in class, no? So these peers were working well, but they were talking. So to their surprise, one of the kiddos say, you talk really fast. We are making sure we understand what you're saying. No? So in other words, that may happen as well. You know, sometimes people need a little longer to adapt, especially the kids when they are being exposed for the first time to a language, you know, trying to understand accents. We all have accents, even in English. So when that happens, you know, they may need a little support, and the classmate was doing it. So it was surprising for the teacher to discover that the student would do the homework first in Spanish and then translate it to English, no? And in transition, even though it's not discussed here, you may find, you know, the student in second stage going Spanish, half Spanish, some words in English, you know, until they merge completely to the English as a whole. Something to look at is this IBER. And again, this linguistic interdependence shown by Cummins is very important because we see what's the top, but we don't see what's under, no? So we are seeing sometimes, you know, not very good English on top of some Spanish combination, but behind it, we have the student processing these two worlds coming together. So as a whole, they may have all the content they need to have to communicate, but they may not be able to do it in one language. But at the same time, we have culture, another iceberg, what we see on the top, and we may not know what's under, no? So again, you know, many of the things that we experience or how we experience a language or how we receive knowledge also has something to do about culture, you know, how we were brought up, you know, how we relate to others, how we even ask questions, how we are dependent, how we are not independent, no? So culturally, you know, we may be inclined to ask questions or respect maybe being more quiet, you know, and asking less questions, no? So many of those things come along with time, you know, and we all have a culture. So the culture is part of the linguistic acquisition, you know, getting exposed and deciphering what's proper, when to do it, how to do it. No? So as we all see, first we see a lot of silence because the child may be trying to figure out what to do with all these two worlds, one at home and one in the classroom. No? And now these words go together. So it's not surprising that a child may all of a sudden give a hug to another child and the child may be claiming for personal space. I've been in a classroom and that happened. Well, giving hugs at home was part of expression of love. Giving hugs in the classroom may not be what we are going to be doing. So culture. So why should we care? There are academic and social reasons. Translanguaging is an emerging evidence-based practice with positive finding, but this is being incorporated little by little, and also teachers are being trained little by little to utilize it in the classrooms. So according to research, it will increase the understanding of a subject matter. It will develop oral and written literacy skills. And again, literacy skills, that's what we need in the class. And it will improve those connections, that back and forth, that the student will feel comfortable now taking things to the house. In many cases, you may need translations also to be provided for the home. So we bring the parent to the classroom and they know what's going on. Or in those parent nights, we may want to have, an interpreter as well as some handouts. So the parents are part of what we are doing and they can reinforce our efforts in the classroom. But also is not leaving behind that part of themselves, the identity that's so important, that makes who we are. So it's not surprising that sometimes people will say that people have different personalities according to the language. Well, if you are not able to express your emotions clearly, and you are used to expressing those emotions with expressions that will come out in your native language, you may not be able to translate all those words when you're trying to communicate your needs. So it may happen also that when the students are in trouble, when they are emotionally in distress, they may not have the words that they need to express with. So another thing to think about is you don't need to have a second language. Even bilingual or monolingual teachers can do this at home, at work in their class, but also at home for the parents if you instruct them clearly. Why should we care? So about 20% of the K-12 students nationally come from homes where languages are not English, and this continues to grow. Not only in Indiana, but in the whole country. And at 10% nationally, 5% in Indiana of the school-age population are English learners. And there are over 300 world languages in the nation, over 275 in Indiana. So the languages keep on growing. We may not have interpreter for all these languages, however, and that's something to think about. So providing instruction in a social justice framework, is what will happen when we are thinking about translanguaging. So we are being inclusive, we are accepting diversity, and we are respecting and being tolerant of differences. But something very important is thinking about the universal design for learning approach. And that's something we have talked quite a bit about. And we normally have talked about disabilities, but we can also talk about translanguaging and different cultures and different languages. The thing is, when we are using translanguaging, we are being flexible in how we present things. And now you have options for the students and how they perceive what they are learning, and the way we express the ideas, even the way we present things. Sometimes we may need more pictures. Sometimes we may need it more engaging, more animated, more variety of things that we present in the classroom. Sometimes we will need physical action. Active learning is important. If I'm sitting, I may not be focused all the time. Also, the options of how they express those ideas. If I had 2 languages, now I can make a whole. And then, of course, how we get them engaged. And being interested means I'm not bored. Being not bored means I may not be bothering during the class because now I'm distracted and you didn't give me anything to do. So what am I supposed to do all this time? I'm going to be sitting here. So all that engagement in 2 languages make people interested, motivated. Something to think about is, the options for listening and reading materials in other languages are going to need to be prepared. So it may need some prep at times, but once it's in place, it will make your life easier. Another thing is being prepared for the student having some words, but also being ready to finding the answers, recruiting a peer that will speak also that language, that may actually be exercising some practical translation in the class, not translation for main items, but for learning purposes. This will be a win-win situation. He will also learn new words. So it's also a safe way to communicate in other language. So we have engagement, we have representation, we have action and expression. And here you have a picture that represents universal design for learning. And Translanguaging is actually a good representation of putting this into practice in our classrooms. So how do we create those spaces for translanguaging? So we can do it through songs, we can do it through dishes during parent night, we can do it through books, we can do it even how we decorate the classroom, how it visually is included. So if it is in the early stages of child development, you may have, a classroom that will have pictures that represent diversity. You can actually ask pictures from the child. You can actually have artifacts that you can decorate the classroom with. Again, being welcome is important. If I see pieces of my life in the classroom, I know that I'm included. But also, it can be the use of cognates, using a culturally linguistically responsive curriculum, and of course, using peer support. We need to create that environment and our students need to be part of it. We are not working solo. When we are teaching, it's a two-way street. We teach them concepts, but we also learn from our students. Some strategies can be cognates. These are words in different languages that share a common etymology, and they have similar meaning and sound. These are some of the sample sites that can be used. Colorín Colorado is very famous for it, and I will give you these links as well. So for instance, this is a scenario. So Miss Wohak's social studies class is the scenario in this case. And the teacher, she has immigrant grandparents. She has some knowledge of Polish, probably like third generation, ideologically open to multilingualism. So she's ready to put these ideas of translanguaging in the classroom. So she has a diversity of Latinx students, various stages of learning English, in general education, inclusion class, and she actually shares with another ESL teacher in her building about improving reading and listening comprehension. So she decides to start with simple cognate detection skill embedded in her classroom lessons. So for instance, this is an example. There may be some words in whatever you put forward. You choose a text that may have many cognates. You make the students identify those cognates. And now you work towards what's the meaning of those words in their native language. So in this case, if you're seeing it, this is in Spanish. And there's a lot of similarities in these words. So the student may have some idea of what's going on, a way, to have a first impression of what the content of this text is about. So some strategies for translanguaging may also include scaffolded instruction. So using a multilingual key vocabulary and the teacher identifying those main words and teaching them in advance. So preparing the students for what comes next. So what words are going to be important to be learned before we actually approach this text, or before we start talking, in this case, about a history class. So gradually transitioning from home language support to English instruction as the students become proficient. And this will take a minute, but at least we are giving them their tools. And again, it may take actually, and this is research-based, up to 8 years for a student to get the full academic level of the language. They may be studying well, and they may be progressing in their oral, but they still having, to get caught, and it's not immediate. But this is a way to help them out. So using multilingual vocabulary in the classroom will also include many things, So such as considering how many languages you have in the class and how the class is formed. There may be 4 out of the 20 students that have special needs. And 2 of those students with special needs may also be learning English. So all these things may be happening at once. Again, our classroom is diverse, sometimes offers many challenges, and we may be working all the time on how to improve our skills to teach. It doesn't matter how many years we've been teaching, there's always something new, and that's the excitement of being a teacher. So the key vocabulary, for instance, may be overcome in this manner. So if we have translanguaging and there is a student with an IEP, the native language may benefit all the students, and also will have the translanguaging will have the capacity to improve the literacy of all these students. And there may be some adjustments that need to be made, example, writing the numbers in a second language, or there may be modifications in terms of, the length of whatever we are approaching. It doesn't matter if it is in English or doing incorporation of translanguaging in the context, and working together with more than one person that's going to be working with a kid. So it may be special education, it may be general education, it may be ESL educators, and all of them will have to meet probably to draft this plan of how they're going to work with the kids in the class. Some of the, here we have a lesson plan, of what was done in this class, and this is another scenario, a child with autism and actually is better in the receptive than in the expressive, and has good parental support. And again, now you are bringing the parent as well as part of the team, who is very important. And what strategies are we going to use in this case? We are going to support the listening comprehension, and we are going to use words that may be more concrete, especially we're talking about autism. Concrete is important, and metaphoric words may be harder. So we are going to analyze that text for those words. And we're going to contact the parents in terms of reviewing at home and accuracy in terms of the translation of the words. Again, in the classroom, the child is fortunate. There's a kid that speaks Gujarati and is supporting him. So again, we use everything we have in the classroom, not only the materials, but also the students that are there. Another strategy is using multilingual resources. No? So this will expand the vocabulary and actually will give competence by planning and encouraging bilingualism in the classroom, and also will allow the students to switch between the languages. And here you see how it can happen. No? You can read in English and discuss what you read in English in either language. You can listen in English and now complete graphic in either language. Again, the visuals are very important, especially when we're trying to bridge two languages. You may discuss a presentation in English and then actually listen the explanations or expand the points in a second language. And you may read in English and summarize in another language. Again, recaps can be done in a second language. And view the demonstration in home language and reproduce in English. I mean, and this one can be actually if you're having an older child and you have the parent involved, in the conversation, you may want to go back and forth depending on where the child is in his linguistic skills. No? Here are plenty of resources. Again, you will be able to get these resources and you can actually play with them. Again, there are endless resources online. Something about translation, even though it's a good source, not all the translation done, by machine translation may be as accurate. If you have a bilingual member of the staff that can actually look at what you translated using Google Translate or DeepL. Actually, this is another tool that sometimes is not spoken, but has pretty good pragmatic responses that can be utilized. But again, multilingual or multicultural books, and the fact that the library may have many, and you may loan some of those books to have them available at times in the class. So creating sentences into languages can be another way to work on the skills of the students. We may have cards. We may have those cards in English and Spanish. Those are the predominant language that you have in the class. And you can see here, a sentence that a child may put together, with pictures as well as with words. No? So we have the bananas están yellow. No? So again, the teacher may model and explain, and these are the explanations here, matching the fruit and the color, then picking the words that comes before the fruit, same language as fruit. In this case, here you have a cognate, no? And then pick the word that goes in between the fruit and the color in any language. So giving freedom for the child to put the sentence together, reading the sentence, then translating into one of the languages. So now we are actually getting the whole sentence in only one language. Another thing is, the peer collaboration. No? So having the students involved is a plus, and encouraging them to use the multiple languages for learning, and letting them acquire that knowledge can be a win-win. Actually, now they have a second language themselves, at least they have some knowledge of how a second language works. And then again, being calm about the communication and creating this environment of acceptance, being a team, encouraging and modeling how to do it. Again, the students will learn a lot about what they hear, but they will more learn about what you model and how hands-on you are in whatever you are doing in the classroom. And then also be open about different opinions. Direct that discussion, let them ask questions. Let that curiosity be awoken, and let the students discuss differences about cultures and languages. And also about sometimes media, if you have older kids, how media shows different in different parts of the world. It may not look the same here as it looks in Mexico. And the fact that it's important to use the same language and other peers have this consideration about setting the climate and at times be spontaneous when the situation presents and accept and welcome that now there is an exchange into languages, but also plan it, how you can be intentional in terms of how you prepare this class. And also how you choose the pairs, So you may know that one student can help the second student in terms of the language. They may have both languages, at the same level or similar level, and they can actually be of support of the student. And also work with the students to discuss what's working, and what's not working. If they are older kids, especially, they may be able to talk, or they may be able to mark it, in a graphic or through pictures, what they like about the activity. And here there is a resource, and this is a video that you can actually watch in YouTube that shows a teacher actually implementing translanguaging in the classroom. So what are the benefits of translanguaging? Is the fact that you get enhanced learning and the students can draw from everything they know, not just a little. And the cultural validation, the acceptance of the home languages and the cultures coming to the classroom. And now you have more engagement because they have a way to express their ideas and to share their culture. More than anything, a win-win, the social emotional piece, the motivation to participate actively in learning, which is so relevant and important to have everybody involved in your class. So these are my references, and this is what I have as part of the presentation, and you can read a little more, quite lengthy. And I say thank you for hearing, and I would love to open the door to talking and reading what you've been typing in the chat, as well as letting you ask questions or discuss, make a room.
So thank you, Laura. A wealth of information. We do have about 15 minutes for questions, not quite. Feel free to leave questions in the chat, or if you're in a space where you can unmute your mic and ask as well. I'm going to start with one, though, I jotted down. Did I understand you to say 8 years is the time it takes for, I'm not even sure to be truly be comfortable in multiple languages? Is that the right phrase I'm going for there?
Mm-hmm. It takes actually that long to acquire the academic vocabulary that we actually master in the classroom. And like I say, part of it is first the basic skills that you may be acquiring, and then it comes along, all this knowledge that is very specific for a presentation, for instance. No, so you may have somebody being able to actually express, their ideas in the class, and when they have to present a project and it is about chemistry or biology, now they are lacking the vocabulary.
Okay, so I think Aaron Brown's question goes along with what I was just thinking. So 8 years, we're constantly adding new academic vocabulary all the time, though. So I don't know, can you ever really get caught up?
I don't think that anybody who is bilingual will be ever completely 100%. We are always learning another vocabulary. And also something that's very important to think about is that the students will be experimenting with the language that they are acquiring. So you are going to see that at times it looks like the language is going up and all of a sudden it's going down. So you see this up and down in language as they try to create with the language. So the intermediate level of languages is when they actually start forming sentences. So we are talking about creating sentences in the present tense and still not narrating in the past or other verb tenses. So when actually the students are advancing to those higher ranks, higher level, say advanced beginner, advanced middle, now you see that they are starting using the past tense and they have more grammatical challenging constructions in what they express with. So that's something to think about.
Yeah. And honestly, when you think about your first language acquisition, it kind of does that as well. So it does make sense that a second would kind of follow some of those same up down waves. As I like how you said that you're experimenting, you're playing with that second language, trying to make all those neurons in your brain do what you want them to do.
And that's the other thing. Once they are advancing, third grade starts being really rich in reading, and actually getting a taste of all the vocabulary, even math vocabulary. Let's say that the student is coming from another country and they may know the vocabulary of math in their native language. Now is acquiring the terms. That doesn't mean they don't know math, but they don't recognize now these words that they learned originally in their native language. I still cannot do math in English. I do math in Spanish. Why? Because those initial stepping stones in math were created in Spanish. And unfortunately, it will actually delay my thinking if I had to translate it to English. So those are things that sometimes we don't think much about, but there's so much value in them. Yes.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Okay, Rita left a comment. I remember when I was in language classes in college, Spanish and Italian, and think the learning process would have been so much easier for me if the instructor incorporated some English. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, we are old school, at least I am old school. And when I started learning English, the focus was only speaking English. Something very important is that we may not be able to express those rules of how that language works in that second language. And the student may have a lot of questions, but by going back and forth, now the student can get the whole picture, no?
Yeah, I love something you said. This was very early in your presentation. It's the very first thing I wrote down, but you said be flexible in how we communicate. And I love the idea, but I also love it because it shows so much value and appreciation of the student, that there isn't just one way. And I'm going to appreciate you and value you as a human. And we're going to be flexible and we're going to figure this out together. This isn't just a you thing. This is an us thing. And I love that idea.
And I love that you're bringing to the table the fact that we communicate in a different manner, even gestures, no? So a lot of the language happens, in silence. So if we are looking at people communicating, there's a body language that goes along, no? And there are gestures that go with the languages, things that we may not even think about, so how do they translate or transfer to the second language? And what are the students missing now? No? So yes.
Yeah, I had never thought about that, that even the language, even the gestures need some translating. I never thought of that until you said it right now. Feel free to leave other questions in the chat. So I was looking back through my notes. So Rita, I saw you put, I'm sorry, Rita, Laura, I saw you put some links in there. Were those links in the chat that you also had in the presentation? Is that what those are?
Yes, yes, those are also in the presentation, but I thought I will add it along. So you have an opportunity to copy it as what you would like. But again, you can see them in the presentation as well.
So for those of you watching the recording, I'm writing myself a note right now. I will also put in the show notes some of these things from the chat. So please take a look at the show notes for these URLs that Laura has left. And I can't write and talk, so there we go. There's my note to myself. Thank you.
Okay, if there are any questions, and I'm trying to go back and looking at the chat. Yeah.
I'll do the same. I don't.
Okay. Through something just to add and to think about now. So we normally do the ESL testing for quite a long time, and the students may stay in those classrooms quite a bit, and something that's really hard to comprehend is how long it takes for them to come out those ESL supports. And the thing is that what goes tested mainly is not the everyday language, is the academic language. And that goes along with what I was presenting. That may be something that the parents need to understand. Sometimes when we have meetings, the parents may be saying, my child speaks English. And he's very savvy. He navigates the world on a daily basis, and why he's still in these classrooms. No, so that's a good explanation for you to express. It takes quite a long time for them to acquire this academic language that they will need for college later on. So that's why they are receiving these extra services, and that's why we are all working as a team, that your child will get the vocabulary that he needs. No? So,
Well, I also think about that you say, why is my student in this class? He's navigating the world well. I think we also need to remember that about the parents, that they may be navigating the world, but there's a lot going on in that brain as we're navigating between different languages. And, educators, we are really bad about using a lot of jargon and a lot of acronyms that need to be explained. Even though someone presents like, hey, I get this, we need to stop for a moment and unpack some language that we're just tossing around so casually.
Yeah. And again, everything that we use for the students can be used for the parents. So when you are in the meeting, as much as you can demonstrate and show, what does it really mean? I remember the first time, I was pretty new interpreting for the schools, and we had a lot of these abbreviations, such as BOY, MOY. So beginning of the year, and it took a minute. The parent was given, this handout, and I didn't know what the abbreviations were at first either. So that's another thing. Sometimes the interpreters may not know all the abbreviations. Can you imagine the parent when he's reading all these things on their own? Or even reading, we measure reading with letters. What do the letters mean? So how you can give a practical example of how that relates to the performance of the child. Something else, the names of the test. I remember M class was one test that I was interpreting for. In my mind, I thought that was the name of a class. No, so be aware of the parent may not know, things such as goals, that you're working on speech goals. You are reinforcing a speech therapy that the child is receiving. And we are talking about CVC words. What are CVC words? The parent may not even know, because the CVC words may not exist in their native language and how the child will receive any help at home once they leave. So all these things, again, it's a never-ending, learning, even for us, what we need to do to help those kids and to help the families, no?
Absolutely, absolutely. I never thought about that like something like a CVC word might not even exist in that home language, whatever that home language is. You are absolutely right. And full disclosure, I taught middle school. I didn't know until I started working here what a CVC word is. My elementary literacy friends down the hall explained that to me. I'm like, oh, I do know what that is, but I had never heard it called that, so I didn't know that. And here I am, a functioning adult, but had someone said that to me, I'm like, I don't know what that is, with no language issue. Then you throw this complicated with language. There's a lot going on in what we are talking about to parents. Andrew's question: will we have access to the presentation after this webinar? There we go. Thank you. That was quick response there. So yes, you can email Laura if you have follow-up questions. Thank you for putting that in there. We have like 3 minutes left. Laura, do you have anything you want to say to wrap up before we finish this afternoon?
A pleasure to support language learning. We are on together, and it takes a village.
It does. It truly does. And so what a beautiful world we live in, though, to get to experience that village. I loved what you talked about with the different cultures that come into our classrooms and just how much richer that makes life. And it's beautiful. So Laura, thank you. Attendees, thank you for being a part of this series. Parts 1 through 3 are already on the Keep Indiana Learning YouTube channel. This part 4, if you want to share it, will be available soon, as well as we're going to provide in the show notes all the links that Laura provided. If you would like a PGP survey, you can have, not a survey, if you would like a PGP certificate, you can fill out a survey and your certificate will be emailed to you in just a few hours is how that process works. So Laura, thank you so much for being a part of our series, and attendees, thank you very much. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.